Welcome to Northlandia, a place to bring your curiosity because here you'll find curiosities. I'm Wyatt Buckner of the Duluth News Tribune, and I'll be your guide as we discover the unique and fascinating stories here in the Northland. Here we celebrate the region's distinctive people, places, and history. In this episode, we look back 50 years at the snowstorm that battered the Northland with 100-mile-per-hour winds. Let's venture forth into Northlandia. Here to help us look back at this historic storm is reporter Jimmy Lovren. Jimmy, thanks for joining again.
Hello, Wyatt. It is good to be here.
Now, it's been nearly 2 years that we've done this podcast, or it's been over 2 years since we've done this podcast, and now we're on episode 80 of the podcast, and this is our first purely weather-related story, which normally, in normal news in our region, is a pretty big talker. We get some pretty interesting weather, especially in the winter time, all over the place. We've had a couple weather-related stories where they're a part of the story, but this is the first story that we have that's purely about a weather event that had occurred, in this case, 50 years ago. And so before we get into that, though, let's maybe talk a little bit about some of our more recent storms, just to give some context before we're looking back at the story that's like generation ago.
Yeah. People love talking about weather here in Minnesota and up here and reminiscing. There's, of course, the 1991 Halloween snowstorm, which dumped almost 37 inches of snow in Duluth.
That's the one that always comes up the most.
That is
every time
one.
we talk about our own current snowstorms, where that one always comes in the conversation, even though it predates both of our existences.
Exactly.
It always comes in the conversation.
That's kind of the bar that a snowstorm, set for a snowstorm. But no, in recent memory, I mean, the big one would have been Thanksgiving weekend 2019 when Duluth recorded 21.7 inches of snow. That was the seventh largest two-day snowfall total on record. And that kind of crippled the area. I mean, not to the extent that this storm in 1975 did, but I remember coming back from being at a cabin on Lake Vermilion and driving back, and they only got 5-7 inches of snow, something like that. And then all of a sudden you got to Independence on Highway 53, and there was noticeably more snow, and randomly you'd pass a car like stuck in the ditch with no one in it, or like a car that got stuck going around in an intersection and was just abandoned there. And there was a few of those. And then, of course, it took several days for all of Duluth streets to be plowed and for schools to reopen. So that's kind of one of the more recent big ones. Kind of another big factor of this 1975 storm we'll be talking about is just the wind speeds and the effect on the lake. Now, we had between 2017 and, it felt like every 6 months almost from October 2017, for 2 years after that, every 6 months, there was like another big storm with huge waves off the lake that battered the shoreline.
Which eventually prompted the city to actually fix up the lake walks.
Exactly.
And now it's actually able to withstand giant waves. And I don't think it's been tested quite as heavily as prior to that to this point.
Yeah, and so there's some similarities where the lake was already a little bit higher, just like those with those storms. And so this 75 storm, the lake was already a little higher. Winds right off the lake, and it flooded parts of Canal Park. It pushed ice up into we'll get into this later, but into a hotel that is no longer there, but is where Canal Park Lodge is now. And so there's some similarities, but this kind of combined the worst of snow and wind. Even though it was not necessarily the highest snowfall amount, it had 100 miles per hour wind and really crippled the area from like here to Moose Lake, Hinckley, and Cloquet, Moose Lake, Duluth, Superior kind of being in the epicenter of it all.
Mm-hmm. And so had you heard of this snowstorm before? As I mentioned before, it's that 91 storm that just keeps coming back up in conversation, which maybe is because it's more fun to talk about because like snow inch totals, it's a lot, but ultimately it's just a major inconvenience, I'd argue, versus like this sounds like an actual destructive event that occurred. I personally, growing up in this area, had never heard of that storm prior to like reading your headline. Wait a sec, what's the storm?
Yeah.
Because again, it's that 91 storm that keeps coming back up in conversation in recent memory.
Yeah, and editor Barrett Chase, who's the lifelong resident of Duluth, also hadn't heard of it.
Oh, really? Baron hadn't heard of it? Okay,
Yeah,
that's really saying something. It's like we collectively just we're gonna forget about this storm and like dump it from the memory banks.
Right. The only reason I heard of it was because we would stay. My family, when we would come and visit Duluth growing up, we would stay at Canal Park Lodge when it was kind of newish, and there was, I can't remember if it was a picture, something there about the 75 storm, because where the Canal Park Lodge was built is kind of where where the Holiday Inn in Canal Park used to be. And the Holiday Inn in Canal Park had 10 rooms damaged because ice and waves pushed up onto shore and into the lakeside ground level floors. And so like there was water apparently knee deep in the hotel, ice in all of the rooms, and it pushed in the wall. Like there was like kind of a wall for like the porches or something like that, kind of a not necessarily like the structural wall, but it was a wall of like glass and stuff, and that got pushed in. Yeah, rooms were littered with ice and water, and so I remember that detail, but I don't think I knew when that would have happened. I don't think I knew about other details from that storm. As for past, retrospectives on, the News Tribune, I think there's been a few. A former editor used to run a blog called the News Tribune Attic, which featured a little bit on this, kind of a mention of it in kind of a roundup of other storms. And so it's kind of made appearances here and there that way. But yeah, for the most part, it's kind of just isn't part of the collective memory, despite, 1,000 motorists being stranded, and not only that, I mean, as soon as people dug out, there was another snowstorm. Didn't quite have as crippling effects, not as high of winds, but it was like a foot of snow or 13 inches of snow followed by another foot of snow, within just a few days. And so
I feel like that tracks though, in terms of, it seems like a lot of our weather events are followed by another weather event. Like, in 2022, 2022, we had that big snow dumping, but like, it's not as considered as high on the snow totals because it took place over multiple days, and like it wasn't a singular event versus like 1991 storm was like one singular event. Right. It's probably gonna hold that record forever. Yeah. So it kind of makes sense that there's another weather event that immediately followed it.
Right.
Albeit less destructive.
Exactly. Yeah. And most of our snow, I mean, we've been last winter was pretty a dud. This year wasn't great, but and definitely far less snow than we usually get. But most of the snow we get is like in 3-inch increments, right? I mean, like little things. I mean, it's very, the 11 years now that I've been here, there have been some big dumping of snow every now and again, but nothing beyond that Thanksgiving snowstorm. I mean,
just 2022 was rough with record breaking, but other than that, that's been the one year that was rough.
The first year I was here was 2013, 2014. That had a pretty big dumping of snow that then froze as they were clearing it. But yeah, for the most part, there have not been huge blizzards aside from the Thanksgiving 2019 blizzard.
And I just want to say, for listeners who aren't from our area that are hearing this and being horrified by this, just keep in mind we don't have hurricanes and we don't have earthquakes, or like, it's just snow.
Right.
And in this case, sometimes high wind with it. And so we already touched on like a little bit about this, but what made this storm unique holistically? You kind of described that it was like, some of different worse elements kind of coming together, it seemed like.
So the aerial lift bridge operator and a ship that was anchored just off the entry both recorded winds of 100 miles per hour. It was quite a bit lower. I mean, still high winds up at like the international airport, but off the lake unofficially 100 mile per hour wind. That's pretty incredible. And so, of course, the spectacle of the Holiday Inn being hit with snow, I think, is something that is noteworthy. Canal Park flooding, that tends to happen when those big waves crest the break wall, and of course it's been the lake walk has been fortified now, but this was pre-lake walk. Anyway, so there's that. I mean, the Two Harbors water treatment facility, which is right on the lake, it got, it was like they were estimating, like, one thing in the newspaper said 30, 40-foot waves, and it took down a 40-foot wall, took out their 2 intake pumps, and so they had enough water for a little bit, like kind of in their reservoirs already, but it took them like 4 or 5 days to restore one of the pumps to get fresh water into the treatment facility. So yeah, it was pretty destructive. Just the lake. There was a lot of shoreline erosion, which we've seen in some of these in 2017, 2018, back to back, or not back to back, every 6 month kind of storms that I was talking about. And ultimately the first storm, which kind of started on the weekend, Sunday, Monday, that left $5 million in property damage, which today is about $30 million. So pretty significant. Other notable things from the storm was that how many stranded motorists there were. There were a lot of people downtown at what is now the deck who were stranded, leaving vehicles downtown. The Radisson was full, people sleeping in the lobby of different hotels because every room was taken. People slept at the deck. There was a handful of employees up at Miller Hill Mall that were stranded there who stayed there for a while. Then went, someone, I think one of them was at the worked at the restaurant. So they had breakfast, lunch, and I think they were saying, yeah, well, probably dinner tonight too. They weren't expected to get out anytime soon. But perhaps most notably was just the role Cloquet played in helping stranded motorists. So the News Tribune and Herald, News Tribune being in the morning, Herald in the evening, they estimated like 1,000 travelers were stranded in our region, 500 of which were in Cloquet, because many of which were stuck on Interstate 35, kind of between Cloquet and Moose Lake in particular. Yeah, so Cloquet took in 500 people, and they were staying at the Armory, the Civic Center, the junior high at first, and then they all kind of moved to the high school where they could then sleep on gym mats and carpeted floors. The high school's head cook, managed to make it in, and she began making, warm food, hot chocolate and coffee for everyone. When she needed more food, she got in a Jeep with someone, and they went around to the other schools and took food from those schools. And then there was one anecdote in the paper that when she got to one school that was locked, they drove over to the principal's house, got the key, and then were able to get in and get more food. The Ski Fleas Snowmobile Club ran mercy errands and rescue operations with first responders. Citizens band radio operators scouted highways in all directions looking for stalled motorists and calling their locations back to police headquarters where there was a base radio unit set up. And then, it just was kind of like this all out, like everybody, all hands on deck. We've got a lot of people and that need to find beds. And so people were in Duluth and in Cloquet being taken in private residences. There was someone who lived along Masaba who had like a dozen people in their house at one point because all these motorists got stuck trying to get up. Spirit Mountain, there was staff and visitors there, and then someone with a four-wheel drive vehicle would go drive out onto I-35, pick up stranded motorists, bring them back to Spirit, where they would spend the night. And so there's all of this kind of happening, and it took a while for everything to get back to normal. The News Tribune had a photographer who ended up being trapped down kind of near Moose Lake, and so there are some photos of semis and cars just littering the ditches and median and everything. And there's also another story about it took to go 15 miles. A snowplow led a kind of a convoy of vehicles through I-35, and it took 3 hours to go the 15 miles from like Mattawa to Cloquet. So anyway, it's just kind of like this incredible help that provided by Cloquet, Duluth residents when 1,000 people needed it. So, but by Monday, then Tuesday, definitely, things started to get back to normal. Only for, again, this was a Sunday, Monday storm. Things started to get back to normal, only for another storm to hit at the end of the week and drop another foot of snow. However, the winds weren't quite as high. I mean, they were topped out at 70 miles per hour, so a little bit better than the 100 miles per hour.
That's still pretty high.
It's still pretty high. And the property damage only amounted to $50,000. Again, the first storm was $5 million in 1975 money. So $50,000.
Which would be much more in today's money.
Exactly. And so Friday, things started finally after two back-to-back snowstorms that had begun, Sunday, started to, as the News Tribune said, The Twin Ports area staggered back to its feet Friday, shaking off the devastating 1-2 punch of March blizzards. And
end of March too.
Yeah.
So pushing to April.
Right.
This is
right.
definitely spring or like beginning of spring.
Yes, exactly. It was March. The first storm started on March. It was kind of the March 23rd, 24th, 1975 was when the 24-hour big winds and storm hit. But yeah, no, by Friday that week, all but the alleys were plowed. So
alleys are always last.
Exactly.
Some
They
things
were
never change.
Right. I know how long it took, in 2019 to get all the side streets plowed. I think, this is it. They were almost there when the second storm hit back in 75, and then we're able to kind of, plow, get everything plowed again, and all but the alleys by Friday. So
I will say it is kind of track even 50 years later, the whole notion of, the community kind of rallying together to help each other. Granted, we haven't seen it to that extent because we haven't had a storm quite like that since then. But, when we have these big snow dumping, you see neighbors helping each other out, people with their trucks with their plows in front, like plowing out their own alleyways. That happens in my alley. People snow blowing each other's sections of their walkways. There's a lot of people helping each other.
Right.
Especially when it's particularly bad and rough and stuff. So I'm glad to see that even 50 years ago that was still the case.
Exactly. Yeah. No, I think that's true. When even a few inches of snow, but particularly when you get something that starts to really affect travel, people step up. People with the trucks and the 4-wheel drive and the plows and the snow plows and the everything else. Yeah, they step up. They start to really help neighbors and other people. Just for the sake of helping people. So
it's almost like a bonding activity in our region.
Yeah, you finally see your neighbors after a long winter of being cooped up inside, and everybody's like, but got to get the walkway shoveled.
For sure. And so why do you think the storm hasn't been remembered or talked about like other storms? Like, it's crazy. The biggest shock to me is that Barrett didn't know about it. He knows about everything that's ever happened in Duluth, it seems like. So that's kind of crazy to hear.
Right. And I think part of it is everybody talks about the 1991 storm. And I think in some ways that overshadows this. Yes, there was way more snow. It was probably just as debilitating. However, this storm wasn't really this was a Duluth, Twin Ports, Cloquet, down to Moose Lake, really was kind of the epicenter. I'm sure, the cities I don't know what the cities got, but the 1991 Halloween blizzard, got a lot of the state, including the Twin Cities, where there's a ton of people, way more people than there were up here. And so you get the mass, you get like the whole state talking about the 1991
That's
blizzard,
true.
whereas here it's very much you
had to be there.
Yeah, exactly. It's a smaller population that experienced the worst of it. And
a lot of it caused by the lake proximity.
Exactly. And so there's just fewer people talking about it, and then 16 years later something happens and kind of overshadows it, I guess, and it happens to more people further across the state, and it becomes more noteworthy. So that's kind of my theory, but I don't know why it's not mentioned much at all, except for, Holiday Inn being hit by ice and waves and stuff.
Mm-hmm. So I know this isn't like the focus of your story, or if you've done any looking into this at all, but I'm just curious what your thoughts are on how do you think we'd respond as a community if that exact storm happened now? Like, would we be prepared for that level of storm now 50 years ago today? You never know. It could happen. Like, we're at the same time frame. It could come out of nowhere.
Right. Yeah. No,
so you never know in end of March and April.
I guess it'd be a test to see if we're better prepared from the 2019 Thanksgiving storm. But, I mean, any of these things are going to take a lot of time to clear out from, no matter what. I mean, it's So I don't know.
Especially the wind portion. Like, that's the crazier, like, destructive part with the force of the waves and the wind and such.
Right. Yeah. No, I think it'd be interesting to see just how Canal Park handles the fortified lake walk would handle such a storm. Yeah. No, I don't know. It'd be interesting to see, all that work that went into it after those storms, 7-8 years ago. Would it have made a difference? How will it work? What are the areas that don't work, I think that'd be interesting to see. So, but no, I think
That's
people
not
would
an
still help each
invitation
other.
weather to
Right. Yeah.
we don't actually want to experience it. I'm just curious if we'd be prepared for it.
Right.
I don't actually want it. Please don't test it.
Exactly.
And so why do you think that this like fits well into the conversation of Northlandia? Again, this is like our first time really talking about weather directly, despite, weather being a constant topic of conversation in our region and such.
Yeah, weather's a talker, but I think just the fact that not many people know just how crippling this was. I mean, people don't. Yeah, it's kind of an unknown unless you were there. It doesn't seem to be in our collective memory for those that weren't, and even those that were, just doesn't seem to be talked much. So I don't know. I think it's kind of a mystery that why it isn't. So I thought that maybe kind of fit Northlandia, but just some kind of fun anecdotes in the midst of kind of a wild storm with, amateur radio operators and snowmobilers, and rescuing, all this stuff kind of just kind of seemed kind of cool for people to reminisce on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you're a listener that happened to remember that storm at the time or know someone that has stories about it, be curious to hear from someone that's remembered them,
Yeah.
Again,
Reach out.
Yeah. All right, Gene, I think we'll wrap up there. Thanks so much for bringing this weather event to our attention. Makes me feel a little more like, okay, maybe we didn't have it so bad with X storm and this storm.
Exactly.
Like, okay, that sounds worse. Kind of puts it in perspective. So thanks, Jimmy.
Thanks, Wyatt.
And thank you for joining us in this venture into Northlandia. To read the article for this week's column and see file photos, visit DuluthNewsTribune.com/topic/Northlandia. If you enjoy this podcast and would like to support us, consider becoming a subscriber to Duluth News Tribune at DuluthNewsTribune.com/subscribe. Join us again next time and discover the extraordinary stories that you just might miss from around the right place at the right time, ready to step off the beaten path in the rush to return, here in Northlandia.